My name is Elly Moreau, 28 years old, a biotech engineer with big ambitions. That night, I found myself sitting at a long banquet table inside an ancient castle in Tuscany, the chandeliers glowing like frozen stars above me. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, aged oak, and the deep, velvety red wine swirling in my glass. Each sip felt like fire moving through my veins, fueling both my courage and my fear. Across from me sat Victor Laurent, the father of my boyfriend, Julien. A titan in the French wine industry, his presence alone could command silence. He leaned forward, his voice cutting through the hum of polite conversation. "My son deserves someone with a name, with heritage," he said coldly. "Not a girl from the slums of Marseille dressed in silk, pretending she belongs to our world." In that moment, I felt every pair of eyes at the table shift toward me. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, sharp and unblinking beneath the flickering glow of candlelight. The dining hall shimmered with Renaissance paintings, gold-framed and proud, their saints and monarchs staring down like silent judges. I felt the weight of history pressing against my shoulders, as though the walls themselves were waiting to see what I, an outsider, would do when cornered by the king of the Laurent Empire. I drew in a slow breath, set the delicate silk napkin beside the untouched codfish on my plate, and rose with deliberate calm. My knees didn't tremble, though my heart thundered like a war drum in my chest. "Thank you for the dinner, Monsieur Laurent," I said, my voice steady, carrying through the vaulted chamber. "And thank you for being honest with me. I am Elly, a woman who has learned to stand on her own feet. I grew up in the slums, yes, but I built my life and my career with nothing but grit and bare hands." For a moment, silence rippled through the room, thicker than smoke. I could feel the sting of judgment from jeweled wives and polished airs, but I would not bow. I let my gaze meet Victor's, unwavering. "This is my story," I continued, "of how I turned humiliation into the most valuable lesson for a proud man like you." At my side, Julien reached for me. His warm hand closed around mine, desperation in his eyes. "Elly, don't go," he whispered, as though holding me could hold the night together. My chest ached at the plea, but I tightened my grip once, then let his hand slip away. "It's all right, my love," I told him softly. "Your father only spoke aloud what he has always believed." Across the table, Victor's lips curved into a smirk, the kind that dripped with victory. It was the smile of a man convinced he had secured his throne, that he had succeeded in driving a street rat out of his castle. I memorized that expression, every shadow of arrogance etched into his face. 'Cause one day I promised myself he would see that smile falter. One day he would know just how wrong he had been. He had no idea. Victor Laurent had no clue who he was actually dismissing when he smiled that satisfied, superior smile. He thought he was protecting his son, his name, his lineage. He didn't know that I, Elly Moreau, was the woman behind Aurora Biotech, the small, stubborn company that had clawed its way from a cramped apartment into possession of a €3 billion vaccine research contract. It was the single jewel every arm of the Laurent Empire had been salivating for, the very asset they believed would pull them back from the slow rot eating their pharmaceutical division. They wanted what we had. They wanted to own our work. And tonight, in a chandelier-lit dining room full of gilded faces, they had shown me contempt instead of respect. I left the castle before dessert. Corridors felt colder up close, the marble under my heels echoing with a history that wasn't mine. Statues of long-dead patrons lined the hallway, their stone eyes blank and unreadable, as if they were witnesses to 1,000 polite cruelties and indifferent victories. Victor's Rolls-Royce sat like a black, arrogant sculpture beside the gravel drive. He'd boasted earlier that it cost more than I would make in several lifetimes. I let the boast sit in my chest, an ember I would turn into heat later. Julien followed me out, breathless, his tailored coat flapping in the warm Tuscan evening. He looked like a man who had just had the floor pulled from beneath him, pale, bewildered, desperate. He reached for my hand as if to steady himself and perhaps me too. His words tumbled out, apologies, explanations, the stunned whisper that he had never expected his father to speak so plainly. "Elly, I'm sorry. I didn't know he felt that way," he said, voice breaking. I hugged him because I love him, because his grief was earnest and because he needed a refuge in that moment. But I had already made myself a promise. I would not be the one to soften the edges of his family's arrogance for him any longer. I kissed his forehead, whispered a promise to call tomorrow, and climbed into my old Fiat. The engine coughed to life like an honest thing, and we left the castle lights receding in the rearview mirror. Those glittering chandeliers, now nothing more than distant stars that someone else had decided I could never reach. On the highway, taillights streaking like slow comets, I felt something settle in me, a heavy, clear resolution. This was not merely about pride. It was about the integrity of everything Aurora Biotech had built. It was about the men and women in our labs who had stayed late, the investors who had trusted us, the communities who might one day breathe easier because of the vaccine we'd developed. I had no desire to hand that labor over to a man who saw me as a story, a novelty, an entertaining anecdote for his table. I pulled over beneath a roadside cypress and called Clara. Clara had been with me since the days when Aurora was only a sticky note idea on a kitchen counter and a rickety laptop that refused to sleep. She had the tireless calm of someone who knew how to make the impossible simply the next thing to do. The phone clicked. There was a brief, attentive silence. "Elly," she answered. Her voice was the practiced balance of warmth and efficiency that had gotten us through pitch meetings and late-night funding negotiations. "Clara, cancel the Laurent contract. Tonight." My voice surprised me. It came out flat and cold, no room for argument. Pause on the line. I could almost hear her considering the ramifications. Laurent Enterprises wasn't a small player. It was a predator with deep pockets and a reputation for swallowing companies whole. "Ms. Moreau, the vaccine deal, our investors are expecting the signatures Monday. We've finished the research. We're at the closing table. Cancel it." I repeated the order, softer but with iron beneath it. Quote the reason: irreconcilable differences in corporate culture and vision. A long breath. Then the sound of keys, very faint through the receiver. "Understood," Clara said. "I'll draft the termination notice and send it for your approval. Are you sure about phrasing?" "Be blunt," I told her. "This isn't negotiation theater." Victor Laurent made his position clear tonight. Let him feel the consequences of his words. There was a small, reluctant noise at the other end that might have been a laugh. "What did he call you?" Clara asked abruptly. "A girl from the slums of Marseille, not fit to be part of his family." I let the label hang there for a beat, tasting it, then discarding it. Tell him that phrase belongs to a man who has never had to look fear in the face and survive it. Clara's laugh was softer this time, edged with admiration. "You're a storm, Elly," she said. "I'll take care of everything." I gave her the next name, BioNordic. The Northern Company was Laurent Enterprises' fiercest rival, a consortium built on precision and patient, disciplined research. If Laurent wanted to spurn us out of spite, we would simply take our work to someone who respected it, someone willing to sign on. "Schedule a meeting for Monday," I instructed. "Put them in touch with our legal team and investor relations. If Laurent refuses to play, we'll let BioNordic move forward." She hummed, an arrangement clicking into place. "Done. I'll file the termination and reach out to BioNordic. Investors will be informed, and I'll prepare contingencies for any legal pushback." I turned off the engine and sat a long moment in the dark, the night pressing in around the Fiat like a soft cloak. Julien had asked me to forgive, to bridge the divide. I had answered him with a kiss and a promise to call. But forgiveness was not the point, not when so much more than my feelings were at stake. Tonight had shown me the line I was not willing to cross. Victor Laurent wanted to treat me as an amusing footnote at his feast. He would find that his appetite had consequences. When I finally drove away, it wasn't with the hurt of someone who'd been humiliated and fled. It was with the quiet, composed certainty of a woman who knew the value of what she held, and who would not sell it to a man who had already decided its worth. When I got back to my penthouse in the heart of Florence, the city lights spread below me like a scatter of tiny, indifferent stars. I hadn't meant to stay long. No one does when they're wounded and furious at once, but the night had left a kind of hollow that needed space to echo. My phone vibrated against the marble counter. Marcel Dubois, Laurent Enterprises' CFO, was calling. "Elly, we just received a termination notice from Aurora Biotech." "There must be a mistake," he said, voice tight with the kind of panic only numbers and deadlines can produce. "No mistake, Marcel," I replied, and I surprised myself with how calm I sounded. "Ask Monsieur Laurent what he said tonight." "Good night." I hung up, poured a glass of whiskey, just a sip to warm my hand, and stood at the window looking out over the river, the Ponte Vecchio a low gold curve in the dark. Victor Laurent was about to learn something useful about underestimating people. The man who'd called me trash at his own table didn't know that the thing he scorned was the very scaffolding of his empire. Aurora Biotech wasn't a stroke of luck or a trend. It was years of fevered nights, of grant rejections and small, stubborn triumphs. It was a contract so essential to the future of his pharmaceutical arm that his men had practically been salivating over the prospect of owning it outright. He'd chosen contempt instead of conversation, and that choice had consequences. By morning, the financial press had smelled blood. The termination notice was a headline across European business pages. Aurora Biotech cancels deal with Laurent Enterprises. Laurent shares plunged. Investors called. Analysts wrote scathing columns about mismanagement and hubris. Victor called me 8 times in an hour. I let the calls go to voicemail. The world liked to think money was a language of its own. Tonight it translated into nervousness and red numbers. "Victor is in the lobby," Clara said when I finally picked up. Her tone was flat, threaded with a practical amusement that I had come to rely on. "He's causing a scene. He wants to see you." I laughed, soft and steady. "Put him in conference room, D. Hard chairs. No water." 45 minutes. "You're merciless," she muttered, but she didn't argue. She knew what I knew. Sometimes patience is strategic cruelty. When I walked into the room, Victor looked smaller than he had at the dinner table. A bespoke suit rumpled, hair thatched and gray in a way that made him look suddenly human. He stood as I entered, hands clenched at his sides, and for a second the old Victor, the polished patriarch who could swallow reputations like hors d'oeuvres, seemed to fray at the edges. "Elly," he said, voice thin. "I'm sorry about last night. My words, they were inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" echoed, incredulous. "You called me trash in front of the elite of Tuscany inside your own castle, while I was a guest and the woman who loves your son." He opened his mouth as if to explain. "I was drunk." "No," I cut him off. "You were honest. Alcohol didn't invent arrogance, it only loosened your tongue. And honesty doesn't absolve you of the price." He shifted, looking suddenly like a man who had been struck by a realization not of his surroundings but of himself. "Elly, I walked to the window and folded my fingers on the sill, looking down at Florence, where life flowed on, indifferent to the thrum of empires. "Do you know why Aurora Biotech succeeded, Victor?" I said. My voice was steady. I didn't turn to him. "Because I remember hunger." I remember being told no so many times it stopped being surprise and became fact. I remember the shame of not being invited, the scraping together of rent, the nights when the lab lights were the only lights that gave me hope. He swallowed. The room's air felt thick and honest in a way that banquet halls rarely were. I remember the people who believed in a dream when the rest of the world called it foolish. Clara, the grad students who worked weekends, the janitor who covered for our experiments when we were too exhausted to do it ourselves. Aurora was built on that hunger and that loyalty, not on the kind of legacy you inherit with a silver spoon. I turned finally and held his gaze. I will not hand it over to a man who thinks his name makes him superior. I will not let my team's work be treated as an acquisition trophy. He opened his mouth, closed it. For a heartbeat, he looked like a man bargaining with the air. You could have had a deal, I continued. You still can, but not like you imagined. If Laurent Enterprises wants Aurora, it will come on terms that protect our independence, our intellectual property, and our people. You will apologize publicly for what you said, retract your statement, and sign a memorandum guaranteeing Aurora's board seats and veto rights. You will commit to a partnership that does not dissolve us into a footnote. Victor's jaw tightened. Pride is not a thing that pays bills, but it insists on being consulted in every negotiation. You are asking me to humiliate myself, he said, as if asking were a crime. I'm asking you to do business like an adult, I said. Or accept that you chose spite and live with the fallout. I let my words sit between us like a ledger open to the last page. He looked away, old habits wrestling with new necessities. If I do this, if I publicly apologize, will you consider reopening talks? I had already decided the conditions in my head, not out of malice but out of principle. I will consider it, I said, but only because Aurora is bigger than my personal hurt, and because people depending on what we build deserve stability. Do not expect me to be grateful for the crumbs your arrogance was willing to toss. He breathed a long, defeated sound. For the first time that day, I saw uncertainty in the face of a man used to certainty. He sat as if the ground itself had shifted. Clara's email pinged my phone. She'd sent the termination notice and a draft of a press statement outlining the irreconcilable differences language. Another thread showed the request to BioNordic. Power is funny. Sometimes it's in the numbers, sometimes in the silence of a refusal. Tonight it was in both. Victor rubbed his temples. I will do it, he said finally, small as a child forced to say sorry. I watched the confession leave him, felt none of the triumph I might have expected. There was only the work ahead, drafting contracts, stabilizing investors, protecting people who trusted us when trust was the smallest currency. I had stood at a table of rich men and their polished wives and refused to be diminished. Now I had to make sure that refusal didn't cost the company everything it had fought for. I stepped closer, not to soften him but to be clear. Do it properly, I said. No press lines that sound like they were written by lawyers trying to hide guilt. Apologize, accept the terms, and then we'll talk. If not, I let the sentence hang, then BioNordic is ready and willing to proceed. He nodded, the movement small and shaky. Outside, Florence continued its slow, elegant orbit. In the quiet that followed, I realized that winning was not about making a man like Victor beg. It was about ensuring that what we had built would survive his contempt and every other contempt that might come its way. Every decision I make is meant to open doors for those who have been dismissed, not to protect the privileges of men like you. My voice echoed against the glass as I turned back, fixing Victor with a gaze that left no space for argument. The contract is dead. Not because you insulted me, but because you revealed what Laurent Enterprises truly stands for. Conservatism, class division, and disdain for people who dare to rise on their own. Victor's lips parted, his voice trembling into a whisper. Canceling this contract will destroy us. Laurent Enterprises cannot survive another 2 years without your vaccine. I shrugged lightly, as though his empire's fate were nothing more than a passing weather report. Then perhaps it's time for the old guard to step aside to let those who judge by potential, not pedigree, take their place. His hands twitched, gripping the table as if it were the last solid thing in his world. "And Julien," he pleaded, "do you mean to ruin my son's inheritance, his legacy?" I stopped at the doorway, my hand resting against the polished wood, my shoulders squared. "Julien doesn't need your legacy," I said, each word deliberate. "He'll build his own success. That's something you've never understood. Strength doesn't come from what you're handed, but from what you create." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, broken only by Victor's uneven breath. I didn't look back as I left him there, crumbling under the weight of a truth he had never considered, that power built on arrogance was already doomed to fall. In my private office on the top floor, the late afternoon light poured through the thick glass walls, washing everything in a pale golden hue. I had only just opened the door when I saw Julien already there, sitting in one of the leather chairs as if he had been waiting for hours. His shoulders sagged. His eyes were red and swollen. Just one glance told me he had heard every word of the confrontation between me and his father. He rose slowly to his feet, each movement heavy. "I heard everything, Elly," he said at last, his voice trembling but sincere. "I'm sorry. I've been a coward for too long, letting my father humiliate you, dismiss you, and I stayed silent. I don't deserve your forgiveness." I walked closer and laid my hand over his. "Julien, you don't need to apologize for what isn't your fault," I told him softly. "But I do need to know something important. From now on, whose side will you be on?" The silence between us stretched out like an endless breath. He lifted his head slowly. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw a steadiness in his blue eyes, a light that wasn't indecision but resolve. He gave a small, determined smile. "I choose you, Elly. Not to defy my father, not out of rebellion, but because I want a life with you. I want to build a future with you on our own terms, without his approval or his money." My heart thudded against my ribs. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Walking away from the Laurent fortune isn't just difficult. It's like cutting off a part of your identity." He chuckled softly, the sound weary but real. "Elly Moreau, you just walked away from a €3 billion contract because my father insulted you. If you can do that, then I can figure out life without his money. We'll find a way. Together." The words hung between us like a bridge being built. My throat tightened. For years I had fought alone, against poverty, against prejudice, against the ceilings people tried to place over my head. And now someone was offering not rescue, but partnership. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed on the desk. Clara's name flashed across the screen. I answered. Her voice was brisk but tinged with excitement. "Elly, the Laurent Enterprises board is in an emergency meeting. They want to negotiate directly with you, without Victor. They're talking about removing him from the CEO chair." I raised my eyebrows. "And they're asking if Aurora Biotech would be willing to discuss terms with the new leadership if the vote goes through," Clara said. "It's moving fast." I glanced at Julien. He was watching me, half in disbelief, half in pride. "Tell them," I said, "Aurora Biotech is open to discussions, but only with a new board and a new CEO. No Victor, no deal." There was a pause. "Got it," Clara said. "I'll make it clear." She hesitated. "Elly, you're basically toppling the Laurents." I looked out the window at Florence spreading out below, the rooftops glowing in the dying light. "I'm not toppling anyone," I said evenly. "I'm giving them a choice, change or die." When I hung up, Julien let out a low whistle. "You're planning to overthrow my father," he said, still stunned. "No," I corrected him gently. "I'm showing the board what survival looks like. If Victor wants to sink with his pride, that's his choice. But the company doesn't have to." He walked over to the window beside me. "Do you know what you're doing?" "Yes." I exhaled slowly. For years, his empire has fed off people like me, scientists from poor backgrounds, innovators who had no choice but to sell their ideas to the highest bidder. He sees us as tools. I'm simply reminding him we're people. Julien took my hand again, his grip warm and steady. "Elly, I'm with you. Not just for tonight. For all of it." I studied his face, the lines of stress around his mouth, the bruise of sleepless nights under his eyes. He was serious. "Then you need to prepare yourself," I warned. "If the board votes Victor out, your family will blame me. They'll blame you for standing beside me. You may never get another euro from that estate." He nodded slowly. "I've lived in that golden cage my whole life. Maybe it's time I see what the world is like outside it." We stood there a moment longer, two figures silhouetted against the Florence skyline, and for the first time in days I felt the tension in my chest ease. I wasn't alone. The fight ahead would be brutal, boardroom politics always were, but now it wasn't just my fight. I turned back to my desk, opened my laptop, and began sketching out the framework for a new deal. One that would bring Aurora Biotech's vaccine to market under terms that rewarded innovation and integrity, not lineage and arrogance. Behind me, Julien sat down quietly, scrolling through his phone, probably reading the breaking headlines about his family's empire in freefall. "You know," he said after a moment, "I used to think power meant control. My father controls everything: money, land, reputations. But watching you tonight, power looks different. It's like you're rewriting the rules." I smiled faintly without looking up. "Power isn't about control. It's about choices. And I'm finally in a place where I can make them." He got up, came over, and placed his hands on my shoulders. "We'll make them together," he whispered. I let myself lean back against him for a heartbeat, drawing strength from his presence. I could already see the headlines of tomorrow. Aurora Biotech forces leadership shakeup at Laurent Enterprises. Mysterious CEO Elly Moreau topples French wine dynasty's heir apparent. They'd speculate. They'd mischaracterize. But they wouldn't know the truth, that this was never about revenge. It was about principle. I closed my laptop and turned to Julien. "We have work to do," I said simply. He nodded, his jaw set. "Then let's do it." For the first time that day, I allowed myself a full, unguarded smile. Whatever came next, boardroom battles, media storms, family drama, it would be on our terms. I had fought my way up from the slums of Marseille to this glass-walled office in Florence, and I hadn't done it to become another Victor Laurent. I had done it so no one could tell me, or anyone like me, that we didn't belong. And now, standing with Julien beside me, I knew we were about to prove it. 1 week later, Victor was officially removed from his throne. Aurora Biotech merged with Laurent Enterprises under fresh leadership, opening a new era where innovation mattered more than ego. Julien stepped into the role of Chief Strategy Officer, boldly rejecting his father's offer of funding to build a rival empire. Instead, he chose to stand beside me, not against me. We became engaged on a quiet evening by the Amalfi Coast, far away from the chandeliers and stiff etiquette of Victor's world. There were no champagne towers or aristocratic guests, just the ocean breeze, the sound of waves, and a circle of people who loved us for who we were, not for what we owned. Victor never spoke to us again, but Julien's mother began calling. Slowly, gently, she was trying to rebuild something real between mother and son, a bond freed from her husband's shadow. From being branded trash, I had risen to a place where a dynasty once looked down on me now had to kneel. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. And it carried lessons I want you, the listener, to take with you. Never let anyone define your worth. If they call you trash, prove them wrong by living your truth. True power built on arrogance will always crumble. True strength is in adaptability and humility. Free love means choosing, not inheriting. Julien taught me that courage and love is worth more than a fortune. For success is not just personal, it opens doors for those who come after you. Every win was for the outsiders still fighting. 5. The sweetest victory isn't in destroying others, it's in building something greater without them. So remember, when someone underestimates you, let that fire fuel you. Sometimes the people called unworthy are the ones who change the game entirely. If my story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me tell more stories like this, stories about strength, resilience, and finding your own worth. Until next time, never let anyone dim your light.